All right, so also make sure that you know again how many electrons fit in each shell. So for that one, just remember octet rule says you can hold a maximum of 2 in the first shell and a maximum of 8 in the every other shell after the first one. Remember, that's the maximum. It doesn't necessarily have to hold that many, but it can hold that many. Right, so also know the difference between an ionic, a polar covalent, and a nonpolar covalent bond. So here you have ionic bond. Remember, it occurs when one atom donates one or more electrons and the other accepts those electrons. Remember, the one that gives it away becomes positive, the one that accepts it becomes negative. One's positive, one's negative, opposites attract. That's how they bond together. Remember to go back and watch the lessons. They're all there. Covalent bonds, there are two kinds. Nonpolar means the same, right? So that means it's the same kind of atom pulling for the electrons. And if they're both the exact same, then not one of them is more electronegative than the other. Remember, electronegative means that they really want electrons. So if they're both the same kind of atom, like an oxygen and an oxygen, or a hydrogen and a hydrogen, or a nitrogen and a nitrogen, they're going to share it equally. Nonpolar covalent bond is electrons are shared equally. Polar covalent bond means that they're different, and one of them has more pull than the other, more electronegativity than the other. So the electrons are shared unequally. Right, then you have valence electrons and valence shells. Remember, those are just the electrons on the outermost shell of an atom, and the outermost shell, is also called a valence shell. So valence electrons and valence shells are found in the outermost part of an atom. Right, and know how to tell if a chemical reaction is occurring. We already saw that in the previous video. Know the parts of a chemical reaction. And then the next part where we left off here is know the base units when it comes to the metric system. So here, make sure you know, and we've talked about this before. Remember, don't focus too much on this one or this one or this one. Make sure, though, that you do focus on kilos and know that that means 1,000 units. Make sure you know that centi means 0.01 units. Make sure you know that milli means 0.001 units, right? That's what it stands for. And then also know how to use the ladder method to solve for these, right? So for this one right here, if you're going from kilometers to meters, then you're going from here, kilo, to meters right here. And so you move 1, 2, 3 steps to the right. And that just means, again, that there's a decimal right here at the end of the 4. And that means you just move 1, 2, 3 spaces to the right. So go back and watch the video lessons on this one if you're having difficulty with this. But remember, it's just how many steps you move and in what direction is what you do with the decimal. You move it that many steps and in a certain direction that you moved, right? So that is for the metric system. Make sure you know those two things. And I know I'm going kind of fast, but you have whole lessons just based off these. So go back to those and rewatch those for more information. Right, so make sure you know how to define density. Here we saw that density is just how compact something is, right? How packed in it is into a certain amount of space. So the one on the right has more air in it, more space, so it's less dense. This one on the left has less space within it, so it's more dense. And then just remember that here you have the formulas for density. Density is equal to mass divided by volume. So go back to the lesson that we did on those and redo some of those problems because you will see them again. Right. Also, make sure that you know how to work out some of those problems. So go back to those lessons and redo those. Make sure you know that the three. Make sure you know the 3 laws of motion. So the 3 laws of motion are. Let's see. Let me just go really quick to Newton's 3 laws. Remember the first one and go back, and I'm just kind of doing like a quick overview. Make sure you go back and learn the details, right? So an object in motion tends to stay in motion, and an object at rest tends to stay in rest unless acted upon by an unbalanced force. Is called the law of inertia. Remember, the second one is force equals mass times acceleration. And make sure you know what all those letters stand for, the variables F, M, and A. And then just know for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. But know how to explain that in your own words, right? Don't just know how to say that, know what it means and to give examples about it. Right? And then make sure that you know the difference between speed and velocity. And just know again that speed is the average is, let me see, the distance traveled per unit of time, whereas velocity is basically the same thing, but you also have to give the certain direction in which it's moving. So make sure that you go back, and I'm just kind of giving you an overview. Go back to those lessons and rewatch them and do some of those problems because you will see some problems too.